What's up everybody, welcome back to another episode of Outlawed Motors. Today we are talking about upgrading the Mini's oil cooling situation because it's pretty sad, like this little oil cooler. As much as I love driving and working on my Mini, there is plenty to be desired when it comes to how things were designed in and around the engine, which I have done my best to try to alleviate and improve many of those things. As to be expected, most auto manufacturers are designing their cars for the road and balancing economy, performance, and ease of maintenance. A lot of the time, performance is sacrificed, just for the sake of cost, as well as being overkill for what most people will be doing with their cars. As soon as you start demanding more out of your engine, you are putting your engine internals and your turbo at risk because you are risking overheating your engine. Most modern cars, cooling and oiling systems are very well designed for the road, but as soon as you start hunting for performance, their weak points start to show, and that is no exception with the Mini. The Mini's oiling and cooling system leaves a lot to be desired, and especially since this car is seeing extreme conditions such as going on the track and a little bit of canyon driving, it is due for an oil cooling upgrade. One of the biggest problems with the Mini's oil cooling system is it's got this tiny little oil cooler, which is fine for daily commuting and on the road, but as soon as you start tracking your car, this thing is not going to cut it. And the reason is because you want to keep your oil within a certain operating temperature. Otherwise, as soon as your oil is above its operating temperature range, the oil starts to break down and isn't going to be able to maintain its lubricating properties. If it's too thick, it's not going to be able to turn into a microfilm and seat between metal on metal, such as bearings. And if it's too hot, it won't have the viscosity to actually keep metal on metal from wearing down, as well as it'll start breaking down the oil. So in order to alleviate that, I am upgrading this sad little oil cooler to a much larger one, a 13-row, which is going to sit right here. A special thanks to HEL for hooking me up with this oil cooler setup. This is a pretty conventional setup for the Mini Cooper if you're tracking your car. This is a 13-row system. It comes with an awesome Mocal thermostat made in the UK, and everything is top-notch. They give you all the AN fittings, which are 10 AN, as well as stainless steel lines. Oil coolers work very similar to your radiator or your intercooler. As fluid or air run through the tubes, these fins can cool it down. The reason being, you've got a much larger surface area, and as you're driving, the wind is constantly blowing it and cooling it down. So the same principle goes with an oil cooler. As long as this is mounted in a reasonable spot where it's getting good air, you have oil coming from the engine into here and then coming back and cooling it and making sure that it's within a certain operating temperature. Now you do have to be cautious that you are not running too many radiators in front of one another. As you stack them, less airflow gets to the ones behind it. So as I'm planning on putting this here, I am well aware that I am blocking a little bit of cooling to the actual radiator. One thing I learned quickly when I was routing the stainless steel oil lines is not to cut them freehand without any tape. I've really not done a nice job. Even if you have the most steady hand or the fastest blade, use tape and then cut the stainless steel braid. Otherwise, you'll find yourself buying $85 worth of more of 6-foot hosing. The problem is because the oil line runs right beside the downpipe, and although there is heat shielding, this is just some nice safe insurance. Because the coolant lines and the oil lines are rather close to each other, I'd rather be safe than sorry and protect them from any
any heat that might occur.
Just like you don't want your engine's oil to be too hot and therefore not viscous enough to prevent metal on metal wear, you also don't want it to be too cold. Hence why you don't want to stress your engine when you've just started it up. You don't need to not drive your car, but you want to bring your engine up to operating temperature before you really start thrashing on it. It's almost essential that you run a thermostat on your oil cooler setup if you are taking your car on the road, because there is going to be times where you are not driving it to its fullest extent and therefore is totally unnecessary. If your engine's oil is not hot enough, then it is not going to have the lubricating properties it's designed for. Now, there's different types of thermostats you can run depending on your applications. There are some thermostats that are sandwiched between your oil filter and your oil filter housing, but in this case, mine is suspended between the AN lines. The way the thermostat works is that as oil enters the thermostat, if it's not up to operating temperature, it cycles back around and enters back into the oil filter housing. As soon as the oil is up to temp, it passes through and into your oil cooler. The other added benefit is that this will not only just help you at startup and make sure that it's not just using the oil cooler once it's at operating temperature. If you're driving on a colder day, this is going to be too efficient for your engine. You don't want to be just cruising down the highway and bringing your oil temps below where they should be. This will also help by closing off the oil cooler if you are not stressing your engine when you're just putting around. The lower one's to the engine, top one is from the engine. The one with the spring is that. It'll hopefully sit right there. Now, ideally, that's the distance. Now, I've still got to figure out where this thermostat goes. I don't want it to have it too far away from the oil plate. So I am considering putting it here, but I'm going to test the fitment of the radiator support. And if everything fits well, I am kind of guessing it's going to go here. I was a little worried that this doesn't have a mounting bracket, but given how rigid the stainless steel lines are, I actually can start to understand why you don't need this. I might not even need this piece at all. I think it might just be able to sit right here, and as long as it's secured or zip tied away from anything like the fan or anything that it could rattle against, I think it should be fine to just be a standalone piece. So let's fit the rod on and see where we can put this on. Ready now. This tube, I don't know why I even didn't think about this, but this tube has to run down into the intercooler over there. So I've got to find a reasonable place to put everything, but it's a good thing I put the heat shields for the oil right there, the blanket, because if the oil is hot or cold, it's pretty much touching the fan. Probably should have checked the fitment. Okay, so I've got a couple potential problemed areas, but nothing, I don't think I can, I think I could probably solve all of them.
Hello.
I have a question for you.
I have an answer for you.
Wonderful. I have some heat sleeves over the stainless steel braid.
Yeah.
Because on the left is where the heat shield is for the downpipe. So that's what's pressing up against the fan.
The fan blades are hitting that?
No, so just the back motor, like the back motor which doesn't move. So just the metal, what do you call it?
The engine is going to move independently of that, so it might start to wear.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you got a point. Maybe.
It might not be a today problem, but it might be a 6 months from today problem.
Right. That much. Alright. Now, one thing I realized was this was tweaking this oil line a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that this wasn't pinching, so this had proper oil flow. It still looks like it's not so happy. In trying to accommodate this line from not pinching and moving this down, I have again interfered with the fan. So I could technically run these two lines out and around, but I prefer, since I've already cut these, to run them kind of over here like so, and have the thermostat kind of tucked in behind here. I found a reasonable solution for this and not pinching this oil line. So this actually turns, and I'm assuming it turns actually so that it can accommodate tweaking, anything like that. But I was really not comfortable with that coolant line bending at all. I mean, it's just not a comforting idea to just have that kind of crimping there. So I was able to reposition this, and by cutting off the smallest little piece, it doesn't push back and crimp this anymore. And that way I can keep this oil line up here and running over and happy, and everything should be good now. Let's see about fitment. The other added benefit to this oil cooler plate adapter is that it's got 2 NPT ports so that you can run additional sensors. I'm gonna run a coolant temp sensor there as well as an oil pressure sensor there so that I can make sure that I know the engine's vitals. First step is gonna be adding some seam sealer. Really awkward. Now from the thermostat to the adapter plate, I'm running stainless steel lines because they're a little bit more robust and because it's near the downpipe and a lot more heat. From the thermostat to the oil cooler, I'm running vibrant nylon hoses because they're a lot more flexible and can come around here and will be a little bit more manageable to get some of those harder areas. If you've never worked with AN lines, I would highly recommend you practice a bit. When you are cutting stainless steel or nylon, make sure you tape, measure, then cut. You know, kind of just like with anything. And these are aluminum fittings, so they are pretty fragile. Don't use a vice grip like I did. If you are going to, use some cardboard around it. And you can lubricate these areas with a little bit of oil just to make sure that it's a little bit easier to press this fitting onto the actual bend. They are super useful, and AN lines are honestly a godsend in terms of when you are doing extensive modifications and you need to make custom solutions. You'll see in the series, I've used them pretty much everywhere for anything from coolant to oil to air. They're just awesome. Where you run your oil lines will really vary depending on your specific car's setup. For the Mini, I found the best option was to run it beside the windshield washer tank, but just make sure you're not pinching any lines because you don't want to restrict oil flow to the oil cooler. Be prepared to do a little bit of fabrication and cutting. I had to fab up 2 metal brackets on my front bumper bracket so that I could mount the oil cooler securely, as well as cut into the plastic radiator mount so that I could make sure that I run the lines without pinching them. Once all your oil cooler lines are hooked up, top up your oil and check for any leaks while the engine is off. You want to make sure that all the AN lines are seated correctly and there's no problemed areas. The last thing you want is oil spewing all over your engine bay. Once you're certain there's no oil leaks, fire up your car and bring your oil up to operating temperature and double check for any oil leaks once your engine is generating oil pressure. This is when an oil pressure gauge really comes into handy because you can monitor any oil pressure drops. Once your oil is up to operating temperature and the thermostat for the oil cooler has opened, allowing oil to flow through the oil cooler, shut off your car and check your dipstick for how much oil you'll need to add to accommodate for the additional oil your oil cooler is going to be using. Every application will vary depending on how many rows your oil cooler has and how long your lines are. For my Mini, on a 13-row oil cooler, I took about an additional half quart of oil. Now, if you're not tracking your car or doing extensive modifications, I would probably advise against an oil cooler. I think it's going to be a lot more hassle than it is worth it, and you're not really going to need it. If you're doing a little turbo upgrade and a couple things here and there, not really your best option. If you're tracking your car, this will be a fantastic option to get the most out of your engine, and I really don't think you're going to be disappointed. If you are looking for something as a little bit of a better cooling options, I do have an upcoming video that I can't wait to share it with you,
and it's a Canadian solution, which makes it even better. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this educational, entertaining, or you were able to laugh at a little bit of my misery really struggling to learn how to use AN lines. I definitely should have looked up some videos before I started cutting away. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them down below. If I missed anything, please feel free to correct me. I am always open to corrections and improving my knowledge because I'm doing a lot of this for the first time. So, till next time, thanks a lot for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episodes.